Hi. If you are watching, this is August, lesson one. We are switching in the month of August from fables to fairy tales. So what you'll notice first on the document is there's kind of a comparison between fables and fairy tales. So just to review, fables have four characteristics. Number one, symbolism. Well, they have this in common with fairy tales. They're so much richer symbolism in fairy tales. In fables, there was anthropomorphism, which is pretty much inanimate or animals who have human characteristics. Very similar to personification. So you're also going to see that in fairy tales. They are both folklore. They are stories passed down from generation to generation, and they are thousands of years old. Okay. In a fable, the good or bad guy can win. Sometimes there's magic, sometimes there isn't. What differentiates a fairy tale is really, for me, the antagonist. And I love a really good villain. I love a good villain. So the story today, of course, is going to have a great villain. Why do we need a good villain? Because a story, a great story, has conflict. So conflict really requires a strong protagonist, a very likable one, usually innocent, genuine, trusting, almost too good. And then we have this really contrasting antagonist who is, somewhere along the line has lost direction. They were at one time probably a good person, but they're flawed thinking. And that's what I love about an antagonist. Their thinking is flawed. It's miscued. It's not normal thinking. Okay. Fairy tales begin with once upon a time and usually end with happily ever after. Spoiler, our story today is not a happy ending. So we're going to start with Charles Perrault. And you can follow along in the document because by this time I've taught it 4 times and I've pretty much memorized it. Charles Perrault was born in 1628. He is a French fairy tale storyteller. He did not write these fairy tales. He retold them, much like Aesop, the Greek storyteller, did for fables. So we're going to start with Perrault, Charles Perrault, because he's considered the father of fairy tales. He was the first. And what he did with fairy tales is pretty cool. He enhanced them. And there's a structure and an organization to his fairy tales. And there's just a way that he portrays the story that's a little slightly different from, say, the Brothers Grimm or other fairy tale storytellers. He also wrote the Mother Goose tales, which were for his kids. Those were original tales. And most parents know that you want to teach your toddler Mother Goose rhymes because the cadence and the rhythm of Mother Goose rhymes helps improve reading comprehension at a much faster rate. They don't know why. They don't understand why. It just helps kids read faster. And both my kids were reading fluent in kindergarten. And when I say fluent, I mean like they could read a chapter book in kindergarten. Now, they did have me as a teacher. We read 10 books a day from the point that they were 1. And that's no lie. That's no exaggeration. That's how much we read. I am an avid reader still today. Love to read. Reading is the foundation of all learning. And if you keep reading, you keep growing and you keep learning. So don't ever stop reading. And I know it gets hard because when it's required reading, it takes the fun out of it, right? Okay, so I hope today our story is fun. So I'm going to share the document here. And we're going to go right into Little Red Riding Hood. Okay, so before we do that, I'm going to scroll down to the symbolism of the color red. Now, this is obvious here. Why red? What is it about red? I don't know why that's there. Stop signs are red. Yield signs are red. Stop light, it's caution. A target, a bullseye is red. Red is symbolized with, of course, Valentine's Day, passion and love, the intensity of emotion, the strong bond. Obviously, danger and violence. If you went to blood and gore, congratulations. Most kids did. It's also associated with war, death, and destruction. If you watch Donald Trump in the next few weeks with the election, you'll notice he wears a red tie. Wearing red is associated with power and energy. It symbolizes strength and determination, confidence and courage. You know, red is the color of China. So there's a spiritual and religious component to the color red. In Hinduism, the red thread symbolizes protection. Catholic cardinals wear red to promote the divine. So we are going to talk about Little Red Riding Hood in a different sense here, because Charles Perrault did something pretty cool. I'm going to stop share just for us. No, I'll just keep it there. He did something really cool in his rendition of fairy tales. Number one, and Cinderella, which I did last year, I will not be doing it this year. He added that little tiny touch of the glass slipper. And to me, that little tiny touch of the glass slipper makes it. He also added the spindle in Sleeping Beauty, where she pricks her finger and falls asleep. That wasn't in other renditions until his. We're going to read Sleeping Beauty next week. That'll be lesson 2. And then today, he added the color red. Okay, it's pretty significant, everyone, because if you're wearing a hood that's brown through the woods, you're going to kind of blend in. You wear a bright red hood, kind of cape, you're going to stand out. Okay, and that's kind of what happens here. Okay, here we go. Little Red Riding Hood by Charles Perrault, 1697. Once upon a time, there lived in a certain village a little country girl, the prettiest creature who was ever seen. Her mother was excessively fond of her, and her grandmother doted on her still more. This good woman had a little red riding hood made for her. It suited the girl so extremely well that everybody called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, her mother, having made some cakes, said to her, "Go, my dear, and see how your grandmother's doing, for I fear she's been very ill. Take her a cake and this little pot of butter." Little Red Riding Hood set out immediately to go to her grandmother, who lived in another village. As she was going through the wood, she met with a wolf, who had a very great mind to eat her up. But he dared not, because of some woodcutters working nearby in the forest. He asked her where she was going. The poor child, who did not know that it was dangerous to stay and talk to a wolf, said to him, "I'm going to see my grandmother and carry her a cake and a little pot of butter from my mother." "Does she live far off?" said the wolf. "Oh, I say," answered Little Red Riding Hood, "it's beyond that mill you see there at the first house in the village." "Yeah." "Well," said the wolf, "and I'll go and see her too. I'll go this way and go you that, and we shall see who will be there first." The wolf ran as fast as he could, taking the shortest path, and the little girl took a roundabout way, entertaining herself by gathering nuts, running after butterflies, and gathering bouquets of little flowers. It was not long before the wolf arrived at the old woman's house. He knocked at the door. "Who's there?" "Your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood," replied the wolf, counterfeiting her voice, "who's brought you a cake and a little pot of butter sent you by mother." The good grandmother, who was in bed because she was somewhat ill, cried out, "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." The wolf pulled the bobbin and the door opened, and then he immediately fell upon the good woman and ate her up in a moment, for it had been more than 3 days since he had eaten. He then shut the door and got into the grandmother's bed, expecting Little Red Riding Hood, who came some time afterwards and knocked at the door. "Who's there?" Little Red Riding Hood, that's my dogs. They think there's someone at the door. Sorry. I'm at home doing this. Hearing the big voice of the wolf, was at first afraid, but believing her grandmother had a cold and was hoarse, answered, "It is your grandchild, Little Red Riding Hood, who has brought you a cake and a little pot of butter mother sends you." The wolf cried out to her, softening his voice as much as he could, "Pull the bobbin and the latch will go up." Little Red Riding Hood pulled the bobbin and the door opened. The wolf, seeing her come in, said to her, hiding himself under her bedclothes, "Put the cake and the little pot of butter upon the stool and come get into bed with me." Little Red Riding Hood took off her cloak and got into bed. She was greatly amazed to see how her grandmother looked in her night clothes and said to her, "Grandmother, what big arms you have! All the better to hug you, my dear. Grandmother, what big legs you have! All the better to run with, my child. Grandmother, what big ears you have! All the better to hear with, my child. Grandmother, what big eyes you have! All the better to see with, my child. Grandmother, what big teeth you've got! All the better to eat you up with." And saying these words, the wicked wolf fell upon Little Red Riding Hood and ate her all up. So he added a moral, Perrault. Children, especially attractive, well-bred young ladies, should never talk to strangers, for if they do so, they may well provide dinner for a wolf. I say wolf, here comes the symbolism of the wolf. There are various kinds of wolves. There are wolves who are charming, quiet, polite, unassuming, complacent, and sweet, who pursue young women at home and in the streets. And unfortunately, it is these wolves who are the most dangerous. So really interesting here. Sorry, I'm sneezing. The symbolism of the wolf here, in case you didn't catch on, is a male. So you think about that interchange and that being a man instead of a wolf, right? So there were obvious warning signs in the story. And if you've ever heard the phrase red flags, again, symbolism of the red. So at the beginning of the story, he characterizes Little Red Riding Hood as a little country girl, the prettiest creature who has ever seen. Okay, so isn't it interesting how fairy tales, the protagonist is beautiful? And if you think about it, the antagonist is usually quite unattractive, right? Do pretty girls get more attention? Absolutely, they do. Absolutely, they do. Her grandmother, this is where I have a problem, everybody, gave her, made her, I'm guessing, sewed her a Red Riding Hood to wear. Okay, strike two. She's already beautiful. Now you're going to put a red cloak on her. That makes her stand out even more. Like she wasn't noticeable as she was being pretty. And here comes the kicker. Her grandmother is ill. Her mother sends Little Red Riding Hood off alone to walk through the woods when she lives far away in another village. So she's far away. How many of your parents would allow you to ride your bike across Capel? And I'm guessing that's zero. Alone. Her mother shouldn't have done that. Kind of set her up. Her mother really put her in harm's way, right? Well, if it's her mother, because it's the grandmother who's sick, why wouldn't she go with her, right? Little Red Riding Hood is, of course, young and naive, unable to recognize the threat when she encounters this wolf. Okay, and the wolf is very, very sneaky, right? He asks her personal questions. Okay, she didn't have to answer, did she? Here's the problem. She gave him the exact reason. My grandmother's ill. My mother sent me with a pot of butter and a cake. Okay, there's ammunition right there. And then she says, that's my grandmother's house, the first one in the next village. Gave the wolf the address. She literally gave the address. And then you see this moment where the wolf says, I'll go too. She didn't question it. You know how I know? Because she's chasing butterflies, gathering nuts, and collecting flowers, not even in a hurry. The wolf, of course, reaches the grandmother's house. And here's a pattern here. He knocks on the door. Who's there? It's me, Little Red Riding Hood. You know, mother sends a cake and a little pot of butter. And then grandma says, pull the bobbin and the latch will go up. And then bam, grandma's gone. Okay, we see that mirrored in the falling action. So the climax of the story is the wolf wins. At least he gets grandma. Okay, so there's going to be an interesting connection here I'm going to make at the end. Then we see, repetition is a literary device, but we see the same mirroring. Knock, knock, who's there? And this time it's Little Red Riding Hood. It's me, your granddaughter, with cake and a pot of butter from mother sends. And then the wolf says, pull the bobbin and the latch will go up. And this time, though, when the wolf says, who's there? Little Red Riding Hood even said, I think that's the wolf's voice. There was a warning. She sensed it, but she kind of overlooked it, rationalizing, well, grandma's sick, her voice is hoarse. Well, why did she do that? Well, we don't want to believe that evil's there. She didn't want to believe it. So even though we can have warnings and senses or look around in a parking lot thinking there's danger, right? Sometimes we don't want to believe it, so we overlook it. And then, of course, she comes in the door. The biggest warning was when the wolf invited Little Red Riding Hood to crawl into bed under the covers. I mean, this is absurd. She had to know that wasn't her grandmother, right? The big arms, the big legs, the big ears, the big eyes, the big teeth, that was just ridiculous. How could she not see it was a wolf and not her grandmother, right? Now, kids love that. My kids were grinning from ear to ear when I was reading this story in the classroom. But by that time, the warning signs were there, and she just didn't look at them. She didn't notice them. Okay, so we have our protagonist, our pretty country girl called Little Red Riding Hood. Make sure when you write your essay, Little Red Riding Hood is in quotes if it's the name of a story, but every word should be capitalized. That is a proper noun. Okay, the antagonist is the wolf, a bloodthirsty villain. We have minor characters, the mother and the grandmother. We have a conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist. So pretty much gone through this. The setting, once upon a time, the where, in a certain village with woods leading to another village. Our theme, our message. Really, this is 1690. Got to go back to the date, 1697. And this theme is applicable today. Our theme is, find it, be careful when talking to strangers and don't give them any personal information. Okay, y'all know this. Mom and dad say stranger danger, right? At a pretty young age. So let me give you the application we're going to go to today. And I hope you remember this. And I'm not trying to scare you. I promise I'm not trying to scare you. What I am trying to let you in on is that information is power. And we can make better choices and we can be more aware if we have information. Predators are dangerous. And no, your parents aren't letting you go, ride your bike or walk miles through the woods, to your grandmother's house. But they are allowing you to go online and unregulated, no laws, no rules, internet, and you think you're safe. And you're not. The internet and social media platforms have kicked the doors wide open for child predators to hunt, lure, and groom victims online. And just like Little Red Riding Hood, children are being manipulated. Those wolves online are cunning. They are manipulative, and they know exactly how to get you. So when you feel that sixth sense, or you have that sensation like she did, you hear a voice in your head saying, this is not right. Listen to it. 1 in 5, every day there are at least 500,000 predators online. If I was a predator, that's where I'd go. 1 in 5 children report they've been solicited or contacted by a predator in the last year. That's 20%. I actually think that number's higher. I just think those are the ones reported. Chances are a child has had this experience. You may have had this experience. It's frightening and terrifying to think about it, but you need to think about it because children, just like Little Red Riding Hood, inadvertently fall into the traps of predators. 46% of children give personal information about themselves to predators online. The predator targets a child in a public chat, on a social media platform, or in an online game. They may comment on a social media post. You know those likes? Starts with a like. You're so pretty. Oh, you're so talented. They may lie about their age. They may lie about their gender. They may adopt a persona like a teenage boy to a teenage girl. You're so pretty. Let's meet up. What school do you go to? Oh, I go to East, or I go to West, or I go to Coppell High School. Now they know your school. I mean, you've just given them personal information. So let's go to your outline here. Parents can often be heard warning their children to never talk to strangers. And if your parents are good parents, they've warned you about this. And I know they have. So this is good advice. There are predators in the world who try to take advantage of innocent children who trust adults. Actually, you know, there are two categories that predators go after online. Get this: children and elderly. And who got it in the story? The grandma and the child. See, it's 2024 and this story is relevant. Children hear conflicting messages. Should I obey my elders, or are they a stranger? In Charles Perrault's fairy tale version, written in 1697, he specifically warned young, beautiful girls to be vigilant and aware of predatory wolves. The wolf in this instance was a male. And by the way, girls, that's good advice. And boys, that's also good advice. When the innocent Little Red Riding Hood encountered the wolf, she was oblivious, trusting. But aren't you a little bit trusting on the internet too? Don't you believe that it's safe? You should be looking at the internet like a big red target. Yeah, it's very, very dangerous. Then she gives them all the answers. I can't tell you how many situations or stories I've heard from kids in my program about things that have happened with online predators. The overall theme in Perrault's version of Little Red Riding Hood was relevant then and is still today for boys and girls. They must be careful to avoid sharing personal information. They can be put in the same dangerous situation as the protagonist in the story. And I hate to be this messenger of this, and I promise lesson 2 is much more uplifting. But I want to do my job as a parent, and I want to do my job as a teacher to inform and let you know that you are in control as much as you allow yourself to be. So obviously we're going to do textual references again. I do not want quotes. There will come a time when I ask for quotes as textual references. The reason is no one is using punctuation correctly. So I'm going to kind of ease into that. We will get there, I promise. So specific textual references in the story made it abundantly clear the protagonist, Little Red Riding Hood, was an innocent young girl who became a victim of the predatory wolf. Okay, those sentences and the end sentence, the story was a cautionary tale for children to not only be observant, but also to not give away their trust too easily. Okay, so I don't mind anything in blue. I am okay with you copying word for word. So you know I give the topic sentences and end sentences. I don't even mind if you use the transitions. What I do mind is if you use my sentences, as soon as the wolf saw Little Red Riding Hood walking through the woods, he seized an opportunity. That's my words. How would you put that in your words? Okay, so what I want you to explain is, how did her mother put her at risk? I gave you the answers, right? She put a Red Riding Hood on her. Crazy. And she let her go alone. And she knew she was innocent and trusting. Secondly, the wolf was manipulative in the questions he asked Little Red Riding Hood, making her believe he could be trusted. Put that in your words. Okay, what did the wolf do here? Well, we talked about this. He wanted to eat her up right then and there, but he didn't. I think he was awfully nice. He asked her questions, personal questions, making her think she could trust him, and she gave away really scary personal information. What she was doing, her grandmother was sick, she had a cake and butter, bringing it to her, and where she lived. Yeah. Third, Little Red Riding Hood was unable to see the obvious warning signs right in front of her. There were so many. First of all, she shouldn't have talked to a stranger in the first place. And second of all, she shouldn't have given personal information away. She heard his voice when she knocked on her grandma's door, and she ignored her intuition, right? Even before that, when the wolf says, "I'll go too," warning sign. Why are you going to my grandma's house? I didn't invite you. So if you're going to put, he says, what big arms you have, what big legs you have, you've missed it. That's just ridiculous. She should have noticed him long before the end of the story, right? Body 2. Again, the blue sentences are fair game. You can copy them word for word. Children today can act similarly to Little Red Riding Hood when they innocently share personal information on the unregulated internet, which can place them in danger. So even though kids today think they're savvy, and when it comes to internet pitfalls, anyone can become a victim of a predator. Now, I told you online they go after elderly and children. My father-in-law suffers from dementia. He's 85. My sister-in-law happened to overhear him about to give away thousands of dollars to an online scam. And he knew better, but because he wasn't thinking straight, so that's who they go after, the vulnerable. And you think you know what you're doing. I think you should hesitate. So this is going to be the application. And I think this is going to be hard if you're younger. One way children put themselves at risk is when they respond to someone they don't know on social media. You respond to someone you don't know every time you like them, right? If you get a text message from someone you don't know, or a direct message on social media, someone responds to your TikTok video, they're prodding. They're trying to see if they're basically putting the bait on the fishing line, seeing if you'll take the bait. A second way predators can lure children online is by asking for personal information the child may unknowingly give away. The biggest scheming way predators get kids is on online gaming communities. Oh yeah. Here, let's talk strategy. Here's what I do to win this game. What do you do? And hey, you're so good at this game, and complimenting them. And hey, how old are you? Me too. I'm 12. I go to this school. What school do you go to? They just got your information. Finally, a third way. So you can do these as well. One way. Those are fair game if you like those transitions. And yes, you should be using transitions for you and the reader. And I'll explain that in a second. Can be put in a compromising position is if they believe the person they're connected with is telling the truth about their age and who they are. How do you know they're a teenager? How do you know if you're a 12-year-old teenage girl that you're talking to a 13-year-old boy and they've sent you a picture of themselves and you think that's a 13-year-old boy and they ask you to meet somewhere and you give them your personal address and an 18-year-old shows up? Or what if a man shows up? And by the way, if you think that can happen, that happened to my 12-year-old niece. Yeah. She does have special needs. So the average 12-year-old is probably not going to do that. Again, they go after the vulnerable. So all in all, much can be learned from Charles Perrault's interpretation of the famous fairy tale, Little Red Riding Hood. The innocent protagonist became a victim because she shared too much personal information, not realizing the antagonist plotted her demise, which can happen to children today. The world was a dangerous place in 1697, and they did not have worldwide internet, putting children directly in a predator's path. Parents today likely have a more difficult job of protecting their children, especially when kids fail to share how much time they spend on technology or what content they're browsing. In 2024, the job of a parent in protecting their child is more difficult than ever. This is why the moral message of the fairy tale Little Red Riding Hood is still relevant today. In the story, the antagonist, a wolf, clearly represented a bloodthirsty villain. A subtle underlying theme in Perrault's version of this fairy tale suggested predators can hide their true identity. cleverly gain access and victimize someone who unknowingly falls victim to their devious schemes. And I want to say falls prey. I just realized I repeated the same word. See, even I do it. Unfortunately, when children today have unlimited access to the internet, they must be careful not to give any personal information away. They have to assume the person they connect with is likely not trustworthy. So when I told you there's a reason you want to use these transitions, what usually happens, and you'll notice that mine are pretty much equally weighted. What do I mean by equally weighted? What I mean is the distance between here and here, here and here, and here and here is about the same. Okay, so let's check this one way. So usually what kids do is the first one's this, the second one's this, the third one's one sentence. You want to make sure that they're equally weighted. I'm pretty sure this one is not. And I intentionally didn't change it because I wanted to show you. So you'll notice the third one's got some pretty good content, and so does the second one. This one's kind of wimpy. So I'd probably go in and add a little bit of more detail to that just to kind of make sure that they are more equally weighted. Right. I apologize for it being kind of a scary message. My intention was not to scare you, but these stories are relevant and they have messages. And again, this was written 1697 and it's applicable today. So this concludes lesson 1, and I appreciate you watching. And if this is going to help you finish and complete this before school starts, great. I'm glad I recorded it early for you.